The rain had barely stopped when Hannah Carter stepped out onto the sidewalk that morning, already running late. She had 15 minutes to get to her job as an administrative assistant at Meridian Holdings, the company that had kept a roof over her head and medicine in her son's cabinet for the past 8 months. Her son, Noah, was 10 years old. He had asthma, and Hannah was raising him alone. Her phone buzzed. The babysitter was running late again. Hannah's stomach dropped. She had a meeting at 8:30, and her boss had already warned her twice about being late. Being a single mother felt like walking a tightrope every single day, and this morning, the rope was already shaking. Then she heard it, tires screeching, a sickening thud, a groan of pain. A man lay crumpled on the sidewalk just 20 yards ahead, his briefcase spilled open beside him. The delivery rider who hit him sped off without even looking back. Hannah froze for half a second. Her meeting, her job, 3 blocks away, and then she ran toward him instead. He was maybe in his 40s, sharp suit now smeared with dirt, his ankle twisted at an angle that made her stomach turn. "I'm fine," he insisted, trying to stand before collapsing back against the wall in pain. "No ambulance. I have a meeting I can't miss." Hannah almost laughed. "With respect, sir, you can't even stand." She called 911 anyway, ignoring his protests, and started gathering the papers scattered from his briefcase. That's when she saw the letterhead. Benjamin Crawford, CO, Meridian Holdings, her own company, the man she had never once met in 8 months of working there. "You work at Meridian?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded through the pain. "I do." When the ambulance arrived, he grabbed her wrist before they loaded him in. "Thank you," he said. "Most people would just walk by." Then he asked her to ride with him to the hospital, just until he was settled in. He hated hospitals, he admitted, and something about that small, very human confession made it impossible for Hannah to say no, even though she knew exactly what would cost her. She climbed into the ambulance, and with that one decision, she watched her morning meeting, and possibly her job, disappear behind her. At the hospital, the verdict came back. A clean break in his ankle, a cast, but no surgery needed. Hannah stayed by his side for hours, helping him through paperwork, never once mentioning that her own world was quietly falling apart with every passing minute. When she finally walked back into her office at 10:15, her boss, Richard, was waiting by her desk, arms crossed, face like a storm cloud. "My office. Now." He didn't wait for an explanation. "This is the 3rd time this month, Hannah. There's always an emergency with you single mothers. I run a department, not a charity." He slid a termination notice across the desk. "Clear your desk by noon." Hannah stood there staring at the paper, her vision blurring, thinking about rent, about Noah's inhaler, about how she was going to explain this to her son. But underneath the fear, something steadier settled in her chest. She had helped a man who was hurt and alone. If that cost her this job, then maybe it wasn't a job worth keeping. What she didn't know, as she carried her box of photos and a coffee mug out of that building for the last time, was that Benjamin Crawford was about to roll into Meridian Holdings in a wheelchair, asking very pointed questions about the woman who had given up her entire morning for a stranger. Outside, the sun was blinding. Hannah called her babysitter, Mrs. Alvarez, to explain. "I got fired," she admitted, her voice cracking. "For helping someone who was hurt? Who does that?" Mrs. Alvarez was furious on her behalf. And then, without missing a beat, she insisted Noah would keep coming to her after school, payment or no payment, until Hannah was back on her feet. "That's what neighbors do," she said simply. Hannah cried on the bus home, overwhelmed by the kindness after so much coldness in one single morning. That afternoon, exhaustion won, and she fell asleep at her kitchen table. She woke to her phone ringing. An unfamiliar number. "Is this Hannah Carter? This is Patricia, executive assistant to Mr. Crawford. He'd like to see you tomorrow morning at 9. Hannah's heart pounded through the rest of the day. Was this good news? Was Richard about to make things even worse for her? She had no way of knowing. So she did the only thing she could. She polished her resume just in case, and ordered pizza for Noah, who immediately knew something big had happened. Tuesday pizza only meant one thing in their house. When she explained she'd lost her job for helping someone, Noah didn't hesitate. That's stupid. Helping people is more important than being on time. Then, catching her look, he corrected himself. Fine. Illogical. It was his favorite word that month. That night, after Noah was asleep, Hannah sat with a cup of tea, turning every possibility over in her mind. She had no idea that the meeting ahead of her wouldn't just save her. It would change both of their lives in ways she couldn't begin to imagine. The next morning, Hannah walked into the gleaming lobby of Meridian Holdings without her employee badge, feeling like a stranger in a building she used to belong to. The security guard, Drew, who'd greeted her every morning for 8 months, gave her a knowing look. I heard what happened. Richard's always been a piece of work. Then he waved her toward the executive elevator, the one she had never once been allowed to ride. Patricia greeted her warmly at the top floor and led her into a sprawling corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows. Benjamin Crawford sat behind his desk, Cass propped on a stool, and smiled the moment he saw her. "Thank you for coming," he said. "How are you feeling after yesterday's excitement?" "I should be asking you that," Hannah replied. He got straight to the point. He knew she'd been fired. He knew why. And he made it clear in no uncertain terms that her former boss had broken company policy by punishing her for handling a documented emergency, and that his comments about single mothers were completely unacceptable. Then he asked her something she didn't expect. He asked about her life, her education, her work history, her goals, and then, gently, about her son, Tyler. She began, catching herself. "I mean Noah. He's brilliant, science-obsessed, builds robots out of cardboard boxes. Want to be an engineer or an astronaut, depending on the day. Sounds like a remarkable kid," Ben said, and something in his voice told her he meant it. Then came the offer that changed everything. Not her old job back. Something entirely different. His current executive assistant was being promoted, and he wanted Hannah to step into the role, double her old salary, better benefits, more flexibility for the inevitable parenting emergencies. "Why me?" Hannah asked, stunned. "You must have dozens of qualified people already at the company." "Character," Ben said simply. "Integrity. The courage to do the right thing even when it costs you something. Yesterday you showed me all three." Then he told her something that wasn't public yet. Meridian was launching a foundation to support single parents in the workforce, with childcare subsidies and scholarships, and he wanted her to help shape it, drawing on her own experience. It felt too good to be true, and Hannah said so. But Ben was clear this wasn't charity. It was recognition. He started the next day. 3 months later, Hannah barely recognized her own life. She and Noah had moved into a sunlit 2-bedroom condo with a rooftop garden where he could stargaze through his new telescope. She had a town car instead of a bus pass, tailored suits instead of thrift store blazers, and a purpose she had never expected to find in an office. She and Ben had become something like genuine friends, finishing each other's sentences in meetings, trusting each other's instincts completely. Noah adored him, especially after Ben arranged a private robotics tour at the Science Museum. Office gossip swirled, of course, but Hannah ignored it, focused on proving herself through her work. One evening, racing to a dinner meeting with a major client, Ben slid into the car beside her, still favoring his cane though the cast had come off weeks earlier. The negotiation that night went smoothly, largely thanks to Hannah's read on the room. And as they rode home afterward, Ben told her, quietly, that there was something he'd been meaning to say to her. The elevator doors interrupted them before he could continue. "It can wait," he said, "until after the foundation launch." Then his ex-wife showed up. Victoria swept into his office 2 days before the gala, sharp and polished, asking to speak to Ben alone. He refused. "Hannah stays," he said, and Victoria announced she was moving back permanently, hinting not so subtly that the reasons for the divorce no longer applied. Hannah excused herself, her heart pounding with feelings she didn't want to name. Watching Victoria, poised, accomplished, exactly the kind of woman she imagined belonged at Ben's side, something inside her cracked open. She realized, with a kind of dread, that her feelings for her boss had become something far more complicated than friendship. She avoided him for 2 days, burying herself in gala preparations, telling herself it was for the best. Whatever he'd wanted to say to her clearly didn't matter anymore now that Victoria was back. Then Noah. with the devastating honesty only a 10-year-old possesses, blew the whole thing wide open. "He likes you, you know," he told her one evening. "The way he looks at you, like Dad used to before he left." Ben had apparently asked Noah weeks earlier if it would be okay to take his mom on a real date sometime. Noah's only condition: no scary movies, and the man had better not make her cry. Hannah sat on the edge of her bed, stunned. Ben had been planning this for weeks, and she had nearly let fear push it all away. The night of the gala, Hannah found Ben waiting for her in the empty ballroom before guests arrived, devastatingly handsome in his tuxedo. When she asked, almost involuntarily, whether Victoria was attending, his confusion was immediate and genuine. "Victoria and I have been divorced for 3 years," he said. "Her coming back changes nothing." Then he closed the distance between them. "I wanted to talk to you about this for weeks. The timing never felt right. Then Victoria showed up, and you started avoiding me." Hannah took a breath. "We work together. You're my boss. There are 1,000 reasons this is complicated." "I know," he said. "And if you tell me there's nothing here, I'll never bring it up again." He stepped closer. "But if there's any chance you feel what I feel, I think we owe it to ourselves to find out." He took her hand. "I'm falling in love with you, Hannah, not because of that morning on the sidewalk, because of who you are." Before she could answer, the catering staff burst through the doors with trays of champagne, and the moment dissolved into the chaos of the evening ahead. But it wasn't gone. It was simply waiting. The gala itself was a triumph. Hannah's speech, raw, personal, unflinching about what it meant to raise a child alone while the bills piled up, earned a standing ovation and doubled the foundation's funding goal in a single night. All evening, she felt Ben's eyes finding hers across the room, and every time they did, something settled more firmly into place. Afterward, over a quiet dinner at a small restaurant he'd apparently been wanting to bring her to for months, the conversation turned personal. He told her about wanting children, about how it had been one of the things that finally ended his marriage. She told him about Noah's father, who left when their son was 3. "He's lucky to have you," Ben said, taking her hand across the table. "And now," she asked, "what do you want now?" "Now," he said, "I've found someone who makes me believe a family might still be possible." Outside, snow had just begun to fall. Standing on the sidewalk together, Ben took both her hands in his and told her plainly this was complicated. There would be talk. There was a lot still to figure out, but he was serious. About her. About them. Hannah looked up at him, snowflakes catching in his hair, and thought about how far she'd come from the desperate, exhausted woman who knelt beside a stranger on a rainy sidewalk just 6 months earlier. "Together," she whispered, "sounds perfect." And as she rose to meet him, the snow swirling quietly around them, she understood something she would carry with her for the rest of her life. That one small act of kindness, offered to a stranger on the worst possible morning, hadn't just cost her everything. It had given her everything instead.